Armed conflict has been with us since the dawn of civilization. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of armies as far back as 10,000 BC. Military history has always existed on a grand scale, with legendary battles fought on land, sea, and air. From ancient daggers to modern medals of honor, in expert hands, these relics reveal the stories of those who are no longer here to speak for themselves. Join us as we unlock the secrets of Militaria. Today on Militaria, we explore innovations in chemical defensive gear after the First World War, a flag that was waved in surrender during World War II, and a naval memento from the War of 1812. Jennifer examines a snuff box made from remnants of warships that fought in the War of 1812.
There's so much in this unique little snuff box that talks about not only the War of 1812, but how it changed Halifax, how it shaped our history.
Jennifer looks at a flag that was flown in surrender by the crew of German U-boat 190.
The museum, you never know what's going to walk through our door, and the patrons and the stories that accompany the artifacts that they bring.
Andrew studies how gas mask technology compared between the Canadians and Germans during World War II.
Yeah, the 12-year-old me is very happy, because I am still only 12 years old inside. My name is Andre Comeau, and I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Today I brought in some examples of World War II German gas mask and another example of a World War II Canadian gas mask. So gas warfare was used in World War I as a main weapon, but since then, for various reasons, it has fallen out of use. It seems that today in our time, soldiers carry all the equipment they need for gas warfare, but thankfully, it is seldom used in our time.
Of all the warfare advancements during the First World War, perhaps none invoked such fear as chemical warfare. Phosgene, chlorine, and mustard gas were used liberally throughout many of its battles. The impacts of this airborne weapon were gruesome, and the devastating physical effects came with an equally horrific psychological element. In April of 1915, a chemical attack on British and Canadian regiments during the Second Battle of Ypres motivated Newfoundland's physician Dr. Clooney McPherson to develop a gas mask for the Allied forces. Though crude in appearance, this method of defense proved effective for both sides, providing critical protection for otherwise totally vulnerable troops. By the Second World War, gas masks had become standard issues for every Allied infantryman and Axis soldier alike.
Andre, thanks for dropping by Militaria. What goodies have you brought for us today?
Well, thanks for having me, Andrew. I brought in my collection of World War II gas masks. 2 of these are German, and this one is Canadian. This one is named.
Yep.
The soldier took the time to sew a tag onto here with his name,
fascinating, yeah.
also on the filter and on the canister itself.
Mm-hmm.
This one is complete. The lenses are inside the container lid, and it also has the carrying strap, which this one is missing.
And to balance out the German contingent, of course, we have the Canadian/British example, the pattern 44, which interestingly was used at, this pattern was used at D-Day, and we see it 1944 and after. You also have the bag that accompanies the pattern 44 gas mask, which is great to have it complete like that. Yeah, this is a great example of Second World War gas mask. The First World War was such a horrific experience with gas. Thankfully, although the Second World War was very brutal, at least the soldiers were spared the use of gas. So, Andre, as you know, these were essential pieces of gear for the standard World War II soldier. Of course, gas wasn't really used in the Second World War, but the reason people had these is because of the carnage that happened because of the gas usage in the First World War. What got you into collecting these things?
Well, when I was a younger man than I am now, one day I was walking around downtown and I went into an antique store, and there on the shelf was one of these. No mask, just the canister. And at that time it was 10 whole dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a fortune in 1976.
Yeah, yeah.
So I couldn't buy it that day, but I said to myself, if I ever have the means to acquire a piece of World War II history, I will get myself a German gas mask. Well, now I have two.
You got some great specimens, actually. Yeah, that's great. Which one is named, Andre?
That would be the earlier one, this one here.
Maybe we can just show that, see if we can get a...
Sure.
Be able to show that to the camera.
It's on the bottom.
Oh yeah, it's named, here we go. Yeah. GEFR Keeler, so that's Gefreiter Keeler, which is rank of private in the German military. Yeah, that's great. And of course on this one, I don't know if it's as clear on that one, we've got the eagle and swastika on the bottom. Along, yeah, that's a great, it's a lot of great markings on them.
And one thing I find interesting about this mask is that the filter is on the left-hand side rather than on the bottom. And I think, personally, I find that an interesting development in gas mask history because it allows the soldier, assuming he's right-handed, to fire his weapon wearing the mask without having the filter get in the way.
You know, that's a good point, actually. I've never even thought about that, but you're right, actually. It is off to the side, and that's actually a British design. Interesting, I've never thought about that, but yeah, you're right.
And modern gas masks, just as an aside, have a provision for the filter to be attached on either side because 10% of us are left-handed, so a left-handed shooter would want the filter on the right-hand side.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Gas is a terrible weapon. My grandmother's uncle was gassed, and he only lived a short time after the war. So, of all the horrible ways we've discovered to kill each other, gas is probably up there in one of the worst ones. There are many other ways, of course, but personally, I would not want to be gassed. It's a horrible way to die, for sure.
So, Andre, thanks for bringing these in. I really find this interesting. Maybe a point to mention is you have done a little bit of restoration to this one, I believe.
Correct.
Wonderful job on the restoration on that. Normally, I tell people never to touch an object, but I think you did a fantastic job there.
It's always a trade-off between preserving an item and destroying it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I try and find a balance in between that. You can't let the piece continue to rust.
No.
So this is now, you can probably see it's very dark. So it's inactive.
Yeah,
I'll never get this down to the bare metal again, nor do I want to, because
absolutely.
then the paint will disappear.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for bringing that in. We appreciate a little bit of the history of gas masks in the 20th century. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thank you. I'm always looking for new pieces to add to my collection. I was saying to Andrew earlier that the two things I'd like to acquire next would be the earlier versions of each of those masks. So the World War I German gas mask and the World War I box respirator mask.
Coming up on Militaria.
What's interesting about this particular item is that it is a surrender flag, but it is an unofficial surrender flag.
My name is Lisa McNiven. I'm an archivist at the Naval Museum of Halifax, and I brought in the U-190 surrender flag. You never know what's going to walk through our door, and the patrons and the stories that accompany the artifacts that they bring. Flags tell stories of loss or surrender. Every day, I find that there's a new experience. It really is a fun day at the museum.
As a symbol of surrender, the white flag originated with ancient Roman soldiers who relied on white wool and olive branches to cease combat and call for negotiations. During the Middle Ages in Western Europe, this modern symbol of capitulation began to take hold. Instantly identifiable, the colour white spoke a universal language of truce in stark contrast to the hostilities on the battlefield. During the American Civil War, soldiers relied on white flags to protect them as they collected their wounded. When the Nazis surrendered in 1945, it was without standard surrender flags, and they were forced to improvise by waving whatever materials they could find. Today, the flag and its meanings are codified in the Hague Conventions, which also condemns any malicious misuse of the white flag's peaceful intentions.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Welcome to Militaria. What have you brought us today?
Today, I've brought in a surrender flag from German U-boat 190.
What's interesting about this particular item is that it is a surrender flag, but it is an unofficial surrender flag. So when U-190 got the orders in May, at the beginning of May 4th, May 5th, that the war had ended, they were told to surface the boat and to flag down an aircraft flying by or a ship that was passing by to say that they were surrendering. Surrendering a U-boat was not a concept at all. These guys were told that you either went down with the boat, scuttled the boat, and that was it. So the idea of surrendering a U-boat to the Allies was just something they never thought about. So when the crew of U-190 spotted a Royal Canadian Air Force cancel flying by, they ordered one of their sailors to take a piece of their pant and make this makeshift flag to wave over the conning tower of U-190. And what's really unique about this piece is you can see the haste in which it was made, the stitching along the side, and how just rough and it really is. And you really could tell that, you know, out of need and haste, they made this flag and they flagged down that cancel. And the U-190 was eventually towed into Bulls Bay, Newfoundland by the 14th of May 1945.
Mother of necessity, this is a spur-of-the-moment flag.
Absolutely, and one of a kind. As far as I know, there are no other U-boats that made a flag to surrender. I believe it was on April 16th, 1945, that HMS Esquimalt, which was a Bangor-class minesweeper, was just off the harbor of Halifax, off Chebucto Head. And in the middle of the night, U-190 spotted the ship, torpedoed the ship, and the ship went down. Over 30 guys perished and lost their lives. A few were left floating in the water and were rescued. But by the time a rescue vessel came by, U-190 had disappeared. And from what I understand, when the war ended, U-190 surrendered off just the coast of Newfoundland. What happened to the boat?
Immediately after surrendering and being taken into Newfoundland, it was commissioned by the RCN. It was used as a training vessel for the RCN. And it was also taken on more of a tour up and down Canada's east coast, showing Canadian citizens a captured German submarine.
A lot of the U-boats carried a machine called Enigma, and it was a coding machine that the Germans used to communicate with each other. So if those ever got into the hands of the Allies could decode their messages, which we all know eventually did happen, and one did get captured and was decoded. And so the order to either scuttle the boat or go down with the boat was really to protect that secrecy and that secret communication process that they had developed during a time of war. Was it uncommon for German U-boats such as U-190 to be off the coast of Canada and stalking the harbor areas?
No, not at all. I can speak at least for the history of the harbor right outside of Halifax, Chebucto Head. During the course of the war, there were 14 sinkings of RCN vessels by German U-boats. So it wasn't always publicly acknowledged. There was a censor at the time called Jefferson, and he was keeping tabs and also asking out of a sense of patriotic duty to the newspapers to either delay or suppress sinkings of RCN ships outside of Halifax during wartime.
And was that done to prevent people from panicking or just that mass hysteria that might come with the idea that the fact that the enemy was just off the coast?
Exactly, and also the RCN wanted to have an ability to make sure that survivors were accounted for, or that if there were fatalities, they were accurate in their numbers.
From what we know as well is that U-190 was out on reconnaissance itself. And what it was doing was flagging convoys leaving and Allied ships that were perhaps not in a convoy that would be vulnerable targets. So there was this, from both sides, you had this idea of surveillance and watching and patrolling that was happening. And so from what this tells me and what U-190's story tells me is that the threat was very prevalent. It was always there.
That's right. A daily threat to the coast of Halifax.
Halifax was a port of a lot of Allied navies, and so you had a whole bunch of merchant ships, a whole bunch of RCN and other naval ships coming into Halifax, coming into Newfoundland and up and down the coast. And so that area of water was a prime target for any U-boat. every day ships left on convoys, and every day those were potential targets to take out. Thank you, Lisa, for bringing the surrender flag of U-190 to the show today.
You're welcome.
This flag is currently on display at the Naval Museum of Halifax. How did the museum acquire it?
In 1986, Commodore McGilvery, at the time was Chief of Staff of the Maritime Command, donated it to the museum. Textile is a very temperamental artifact, depending on the condition that it is when it comes into our museum, whether it's had light exposure, whether it's been exposed to insects or mold or rot. So there are certain techniques that we have to use to preserve the textile.
Both the flag and the gauge, where are they on display in the museum?
They're on the second floor in the Naval Museum of Halifax in our room titled Battle of the Atlantic. Every day I find that there's a new experience because every artifact is attached to a story that's very personal and very important to the people that are bringing it in. There's a story that's connected to their father or their mother's service, and everyone I find is connected by heroism and humanity. Every story we can tell at the museum.
Coming up on Militaria.
Snuff, for people who might not know, and they probably don't, is powdered tobacco, powdered into like a fine powder. My name's Keith Mercer. I work for Parks Canada. I'm based at the Halifax Citadel National Historic Site, and I manage public history and cultural heritage for all of our sites in mainland Nova Scotia. I brought you a snuff box from 1856. A snuff box carries a powdered tobacco, and it was kind of used by elite social circles back in the 18th and 19th centuries. And this particular one is a memento from a famous naval battle from the War of 1812.
Despite its success in the Napoleonic Wars, the Royal Navy was shaken by the upgraded American naval forces in the War of 1812. That changed with an overt challenge issued to the USS Chesapeake by Halifax's HMS Shannon on June 1, 1813. In the Battle of Boston Harbor, British Captain Philip Broke gambled himself, his ship, and his men against those of the USS Chesapeake's Captain James Lawrence. And it paid off. The Royal Navy claimed victory within minutes, and HMS Shannon returned to Halifax, Nova Scotia, with the American frigate in tow. At the helm was Second Lieutenant Wallace, who captained both ships during the 6-day voyage as Broke recovered from his wounds. His triumphant delivery of the two vessels marked the beginning of a long and decorated career.
Hi, Keith. Welcome to Militaria. What have you brought us today?
Hi, Jen. Well, it's wonderful to be here. I brought you a snuff box. Snuff, for people who might not know, and they probably don't, is powdered tobacco. Powdered into like a fine powder. And by the 18th and 19th centuries, this was the way that people in elite social circles were getting their hit of nicotine, and you literally put it on your finger and you kind of took a big snort and you got your hit that way. And the powder would have been contained in a box like this that you see in the top, and they would have been widely circulated and used in homes and so forth, and many of them have ended up in museums. So the really cool part about this artifact in two pieces is that the wood is made of fragments from the two warships in the War of 1812, and I'll just read the engravings because they're really neat. So I'll start with the little gun carriage, and it reads, "Made from a piece of the HMS frigate Shannon in commemoration of the action in Boston Bay in 1813 with the U.S. frigate Chesapeake." Well, this is a pretty special snuff box. So this particular one dates from 1856. It was a gift in 1856 from Admiral Provost Wallace, British Admiral. Admiral Wallace was a hero from the War of 1812, from the famous naval battle between the Shannon and the Chesapeake, where the British warship, the Shannon, took the American ship, the Chesapeake, off Boston Harbor, towed them back to Halifax to great ovations and kind of a turning of the tide in the War of 1812 for the British. So in this particular case, many years later, he was a young lieutenant in the War of 1812, but by the 1850s he was an admiral. And a new class of warships, steam powered and iron hulled, were commissioned and launched in the 1850s. One of them was the same namesake of his ship, HMS Shannon. And for the launching, He arrived at the ship and he gave this snuff box as a present to the junior officers of the gunroom as a memento from the famous battle of the namesake of the ship from the War of 1812.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
So what happened in June 1813 is you had this background of the war going pretty bad for the British. So HMS Shannon had an excellent captain, Captain Philip Brooke, who wanted to turn the tide of the war. And that all sets the stage for June 1813. The Shannon, with a couple more warships, were on cruising duty off New England, so around Boston. And the story goes that Captain Brooke actually hovered off Boston in plain sight. So some of the American warships would have been in the port, including USS Chesapeake, getting ready for sea. And he sent a written challenge to, like medieval kind of dueling style, to the captain of the Chesapeake, a young officer on the rise named James Lawrence, saying, "Come out and get me." And Lawrence came out and engaged. So the two ships came off a couple miles off Boston Harbor, and they engaged. The first broadsides were kind of fired, probably within about 100 feet of each other, so pretty darn close. And then they kind of drifted together, and then the British boarded and took the Chesapeake. Kind of man-on-man combat with cutlasses and small swords and all those sorts of things. It was a quick but brutal and bloody action. And when the dust cleared, the British were victorious, and it became Wallace's duty and responsibility to take charge of the new prize, the USS Chesapeake, to secure the American crew, the new prisoners of war, to send a prize crew on board the Chesapeake, and then to make the slow journey back to his home port of Halifax, bringing the prize back to show the British public. It took 5 long days because the ships were in very poor condition, but the two ships arrived on the 6th of June, it was a Sunday in Halifax, and it just sparked kind of euphoria into town. After all the bad news for about a year, all the doom and gloom, which people were really worried about, they were hoping and expecting for something like this, and it just set off really kind of celebrations all through the town, and it became one of the most important cultural events in Halifax's early history. It was this spontaneous celebration, unlike pretty much anything Halifax had seen up to that point. So it was a really genuine outpouring of emotion and celebration for a really hard-fought victory.
Keith, thank you so much for coming today on the show and for bringing this beautiful snuff box and the amazing history connected with it. So what is currently being done with the snuff box? Is it on display?
It's on loan to us from the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, so it's permanent home for people who are really engaged with this kind of history. They would already know that the Shannon Chesapeake has a wonderful story and kind of presence throughout Halifax. There's cannons from the ships outside Province House. Shannon Park, kind of now defunct, but a 1950s military community named after HMS Shannon. And of course, there's wonderful artifacts throughout the town, including the bell at the Maritime Museum. So this is a truly significant event.
Well, thank you, Keith, again for coming today.
My pleasure. It's a big part of the story we tell at our new exhibit, Fortress Halifax, a city shaped by conflict at the Halifax Citadel. And the Shannon Chesapeake story is featured prominently. The snuff box is on display. And we really encourage everyone to come out and check it out.